members across the Commonwealth, and that number continues to grow. Thanks for coming, and Anthem and Blue Cross and Blue Shield really appreciates every one of you who carry a Blue Cross and Blue Shield card. Thanks, and have a great rest of the day.
It's my pleasure to introduce the lineup on the stage. First up, Commissioner James Comer. He was elected as Agriculture Commissioner in November 2011. He has transformed the Department of Agriculture in less than less than 2.5 years that he was in office. He's worked very hard in changing the climate there. He's led the charge to restore the industrial hemp production to Kentucky and expanded the department's efforts to promote local food. Before he was elected a Commissioner of Agriculture, he served in the Kentucky House of Representatives. He owns James Comer Jr. Farms in his native Monroe County, Kentucky, and he also co-owns Comer Land and Cattle Company. Prior to taking his office recently, the Auditor of Public Accounts, Adam Edelin, who was elected and sworn in as Kentucky's 46th Auditor of Public Accounts in January of 2012. Adam did a number of things. He was involved as the State Director of Homeland Security. He served as a Chief of Staff for Governor Beshear. He also worked as a senior executive with both Commerce Lexington and Thomas King Incorporated. Additionally, he's the former chairman of the board of the Kentucky Educational Television Agency, KET. He has kept his promise to serve as Kentucky's chief taxpayer watchdog, bringing reform in the form of $2.7 billion layers of government, tackling fraud and abuse in public schools, and doing much more. Adam Edelin. Hal Heiner is the owner and partner of Capstone Realty Incorporated. After earning his master's degree in engineering from the Louisville Speed School, Hal Heiner became a partner in a civil engineering firm designing water and sewer plants in West Kentucky, mine land reclamation projects in the east, and roads across the Commonwealth. His interest also are in real estate. It led him to become the president of a commercial division of NTS, a regional development company. In 1997, Hal started Capstone Realty, a company that has developed nearly 5 million square feet of new industrial and office buildings and helped bring more than 4,000 jobs to Kentucky. Our questioners in the form of journalists and columnists and professors on the podium today are Al Cross and Sam Youngman. Al is at the University of Kentucky in a couple of different capacities, director of the Institute for Rural Journalism and Community Issues. He's been there since August of 2004, after more than 26 years as a reporter with the Louisville Courier-Journal. His coverage has ranged from presidential to local elections, including all facets of state government. After serving as interim director in 2005, he was named director and assistant professor in the School of Journalism and Telecommunications at the University of Kentucky, where the institution is based. And as a shameless plug, I'm going to be honored to team teach a course this fall with Al at the University of Kentucky on the U.S. Senate race. And we are still enrolling students. Al wanted me to be sure to let all smart, intellectual, sassy women from 40 to 55 that they are eligible to be in the class. Sam Youngman, that's an inside joke, guys. I don't know. Hal Heiner was here last night, and Commissioner Comer, you were too. Adam, I don't know if you got that, but we'll fill you in later on that one. Sam Youngman is a political writer for the Lexington Herald-Leader and contributor to the Daily Beast, a veteran national political reporter. Sam was a White House correspondent during the administrations of George W. Bush and President Barack Obama. In addition to countless House and Senate races, Sam covered the last 3 presidential campaigns, most recently in 2012 on the road for Reuters, covering the Republican nomination battle, traveling with nominee Mitt Romney. Sam is a Kentucky native and a graduate of Western Kentucky University, and we're glad to have Sam back in the state also. Gentlemen, let me welcome you and just begin this way. We just heard I hope you were in the room, a terrific report by Paul Coombs, who's did some work for the Chamber. One of those numbers that he stated was back in 1958, as far as economic conditions are concerned, Kentucky was ranked 46th to 50th, somewhere in that range. That was 1958, and guess where we rank today? We're right in that same number. And this speaks, my question to open up with, after we hear from you for just a couple of minutes, has to do with the youth of Kentucky and some of the problems that face them. So as you give us your 5 minutes or so of thoughts about the future of Kentucky, your ideas and vision about Kentucky, and then we'll return with my question about what we can do for young people in this state. We didn't draw names, we didn't go in any particular order, but why don't we start in the middle with Adam Edelin as a Kentucky leader. Adam, what are your thoughts?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, to be with all of you. Certainly I'm the odd man out on this panel. Hal and Jamie, Hal's made his announcement, and I guess as Jamie's is coming. I'm running for re-election as auditor, and I appreciate very much the opportunity, despite not being a candidate for governor, to be here with you today. As a matter of fact, I tried to offer this chair to my friend Luther Deaton, but he said he wasn't ready for it yet. The question about the future of Kentucky, I think, is very much grounded in a belief and an understanding that we don't have any new problems in Kentucky. The issues of health, of educational attainment, of economic development are things that have existed here since our founding. And the problem is that when you look around and you think about what Kentucky's assets are, you see a state that is blessed with extraordinarily diverse natural resources and beauty. You see a state that has people who have an excellent work ethic. We are a very special place where our folks have a real sense of community. So when you take all of those things and you compare our geographic advantages, the fact that we are so close to so much of the population of the United States, and you see that we're still roughly in the same place that we were 50 years ago. Folks, it's that Frankfurt in the political system there is a delivery device for progress is fundamentally broken. So the way to fix that is to get back into the business of doing big things. And for anybody who gets down in the mouth when they think about our history in Kentucky, the fact is when we choose to be bold, we do extraordinary things. Take for account that we were the first state in the Southeast to pass a comprehensive civil rights law. We were the first state in America to declare an entire system of public education unconstitutional and build in its place a system premised on the belief that all children can learn and learn at high levels. We were one of the first states in the country to scrap an entire system of higher education and build back a system of community and technical education that in so many ways is the envy of the country. The moral of this parable is that we are at our best when we are bold, but we are not bold enough. We're not bold regularly enough. The fact that we're still having an argument about gaming 15 years after this argument lost its relevance tells you that what we have in terms of making decisions is broken. So what we've got to have are a new set of leaders who have, I think, skill sets learned in the business community. I think we need practical problem solvers who know how to build consensus. You know, when I was elected state auditor, they said you can never get your arms around the special taxing district system. Folks, it's a $2.7 billion layer of government that literally has a political kingdom in every single county in Kentucky. In 117 of the 120 counties, you pay more in taxes and fees collectively to your special districts than you do through your property taxes to your elected local governments. They said it can never be reformed. Well, I went in and a flurry of subpoenas helped. We conducted a 6-month investigation. We built a broad bipartisan coalition in the legislature based on the facts, and we got something very big done. We made Kentucky a national model and oversight of what's literally our second largest layer of government. And a people who are capable of doing things that are that reformist can solve all the big challenges we have. And that's why I'm excited to be here today. It's the reason why I'm excited to be working with these two fine men, because we need new blood. We need a new infusion of passion. Because the kick the can down the road approach, being intimidated by the size of our problems, is going to continue to dictate that Kentucky's destiny is somewhere between mediocrity and bottom of the barrel. And I, for one, won't be part of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edlin. Commissioner Comer, why don't you?
Well, thank you, Bill. I was going to wait for Jack Conway, but he's not going to make it. I'll go ahead. It's great to be here. I look out in the crowd and I see so many of Kentucky's best innovators and job creators, and I see people in energies, people in financial services, agriculture, all across the spectrum. I'm optimistic about the future. We have some of the best business people in the state. We have some of the best workers in the state. I think that together we can move Kentucky forward. I'm very optimistic about the potential that we have as a state. I want to say a little bit about my background. My father was a dentist. My grandfather was in the construction business. I grew up working very hard in both those businesses. They also accumulated some farmland, and I wanted to do that as my business when I got older. I believed in agriculture. I looked at agriculture outside the box and saw that we could be a major player in my region in agriculture, and Kentucky has so much potential in agriculture. So when I graduated from Western Kentucky University, I moved back to Monroe County, got involved in the community, started my own agriculture business, started 2 other small businesses, became involved in the community, was president of the Monroe County Chamber of Commerce. Wasn't satisfied with the direction and the type of leadership that we were having in Frankfort, so I filed for state representative as a 27-year-old private citizen in Monroe County and was elected. Was honored to serve 6 terms in the Kentucky General Assembly. I learned a lot about state government there. Felt like I made a difference for my community and the 4 counties in South Central Kentucky that I represented. Also realized that Agriculture Commissioner's office was an office that we were nowhere near our potential in that office from an industry standpoint, from a good government standpoint. So I decided that I could win that office if I campaigned hard, and then I could make a difference. So I filed for Commissioner of Agriculture, and in a difficult climate for Republicans. Somehow I was elected in 2011. So it gave me an opportunity to go in and lead the way that I think a good, conservative, pro-business public servant should lead. So we went in and we addressed the issues that office had head on. Those of you that know me, have many colleagues in the General Assembly here today of both parties will say that I am a consensus builder. I called my friend Adam Edlin. Obviously, we're in different parties, and some people
didn't like it at all.
Didn't like it at all, or either party. So I said, you know, we've got a problem here. We need to come in and let's do the right thing. Despite calls from people in my own party not to do that, I wanted to do what's right. I want to set the example. So now, 2.5 years later, if you look at the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, I think you will see a government agency that you'll be proud of. An agency that is transparent. You can go online and see all of our expenses on our transparency link. If you want to know what I spent on travel last month, you can see that. If you want to know how many ink pens we bought last month, you can see that. You will see an agency that's efficient. We've done things that are foreign to Frankfort, like privatize certain divisions. And as you all know, the private sector can do it much cheaper than the government can. And that's something that we need to look at moving forward. Our employees are much more accountable now than they were. And we brought in good management. We brought in management from the private sector. One problem we have in state government, we don't know exactly how much spending is required in Frankfort. Because yes, we need comprehensive tax reform, and that's something that I believe very passionately about. But before we do comprehensive tax reform, we need comprehensive spending reform to see exactly how much money we need to spend to operate state government. And I will argue that we can run state government considerably less than we are right now at a considerably cheaper price tag. So I'm proud of the story that we have at the Department of Agriculture, but I'm proud of the industry that I've helped lead. Now, agriculture is an industry, despite the recession, that has done exceptionally well. We grew our sales last year by 20%, from $5 billion to $6 billion in sales. And we're working with people like Greg Fisher and industries all across Kentucky to take that number to $10 billion. And that's the way we have to have when we have the mindset of Frankfort. We can do better in this state. We have a lot of challenges in this state, but they can be met with new leadership, bold leadership. We have to have an agenda that moves Kentucky forward. We should be the most competitive state in the United States to own a business. We should have a state where every child in this state has the opportunity to get a world-class education. And we should reform our state government with spending reform and to where we bring in transparency, efficiency, and accountability in all areas of state government. I believe we can do that. I look forward to working with the Chamber and having a great discussion about this today and in many years in the future.
Mr. Heiner.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. It's great to be here with you. I'll tell you, I can't tell you how encouraged I am that you would stay here for 2 days of meetings about the future of Kentucky. I think it says great things about our state. You know, last night the governor talked about several successes we've had here in Kentucky. And I'm excited about that. We should celebrate the successes. But for those of you here in the room that have heard the presentations by Paul today, and by Dave, and by others, you have to come away with a feeling that we are operating on just a small portion of the bandwidth that we could be operating on here in Kentucky. You know, over the last 4.5 months, I've traveled and been in, talked to Kentuckians in 60 counties, half of our counties. And I'll tell you, whether it's a county with 7,000 people or 70,000 people, the questions and the interests are the same. Jobs. Where are the jobs for me? Where's the future for my children that are moving away, often out of state? Will I even stay in Kentucky as I become an empty nester? Where are the jobs in Kentucky? And you know, if you look at some of the statistics, and the statistics don't tell us what kind of state we are and what a wonderful place it is to live, and we have a reputation that when companies move families to Kentucky, they don't ever want to live, don't want to ever leave. We have such a great state. But when you see us hanging in here in the recession at still 47th in unemployment, when you see the kind of private sector job growth in states both north and south of us, and we have half the percentage of the private sector job growth of those states. And then you saw CEO Magazine here a couple of months ago release their 2014 results, where they list the top 10 states to start a business, grow a business, locate a business. Once again, we're not on the list, and we're not close to being on the list. And of course, Texas and Florida are on the list. That's not a surprise. But look who else is on the list. Tennessee's on the list. Indiana's on the list. Georgia's on the list. South Carolina's on the list. North Carolina, states all around us. So when we talk about what's needed in Kentucky here in the future, we need really major change. And with that, we can be the state that we know that we can become. We can become the state to beat. And I'll list 4 areas that I hope we talk about as we go on. One is comprehensive tax reform. We absolutely cannot sit here at 6% when states all around us are either half or less, or the states that are even close to us are driving, down in Ohio, for instance, they're driving their personal income tax rate towards zeros. We cannot stay at 6%. We need to find a way to bring that down significantly. We need regulatory reform. We cannot stay here on this platform that is so old that it has moss growing on it. We have to build a new platform, like the states around us that are competing for the best jobs. And what does that platform include? Several items, including right to work. 24 states have it today. It's becoming the screen-out tool for major companies, especially international companies, on whether you even get onto the list for them to consider for their jobs. We need regulatory reform. We need education reform, major education reform, not incremental reform, major reform. 42 states now have various forms of parental choice, vouchers, public charter schools, and what we're seeing in those states, in the most successful states, actually states north and south of us again, what we're seeing in those states is a specialized form of education meeting children right where they are. And we've got great schools all across Kentucky, and half of our students are doing well, but we've got 55% finishing not ready for college or career. We need major education reform. And finally, we need fiscal reform in Frankfort. Fitch a few weeks ago ranked Kentucky 50th for our Kentucky employment retirement system in terms of unfunded liability. We had finally Frankfurt had finally beat out Illinois for that bottom position. And I'll tell you, we are steering towards an iceberg. And the captain's not saying, hey, we need to change course. But I'm telling you, we have to change course, and we have to do it now. These items we've talked about for 20 years, it's time for action, and it needs to happen in this next administration. And that's foundational on why I've entered this race. I know we can do it.
Gentlemen, as I mentioned, some of the economic indicators that economist Paul Coombs delivered to this audience a few minutes ago. One of the other indicators, Kentucky Youth Advocates just released their 25th edition of their Kids Count report. It paints a dismal, discouraging picture for kids in this state. 1 out of 4 children live in poverty in Kentucky. Would you give me 1 or 2 of your ideas as a Kentucky leader that you would champion if you go on to higher office, or as a Kentucky leader, how you would encourage your kids to stay in this state, pull them out of the conditions they're in the next quarter decade or so? Mr. Heiner, let's begin with you.
Thank you. 4 years ago, I founded a group called Kentuckians Advocating for Education Reform, and it was focused on the kids that start life with the fewest breaks. Many of us, I suspect just about everyone here in the room, grew up in a family that question was asked, that most important question, is your homework finished? Or in the summer, are you in the book club? Or guess what, we're going on vacation and we're going to stop at the museum. Things that change life. Those few words change life. A lot of kids don't have those benefits. And what you can see around the country that's having tremendous success is a more holistic form of education for kids that start life with the fewest breaks. And that form will fill in a gap, whether it's tied to a medical clinic or help with homework or 6 weeks, a half day, summer school in the summer to expand the context of life so that they are prepared, so that they can use their unique talents and abilities to achieve the life that's possible for them. The one-size-fits-all does not work in education. If you come to kindergarten having 1/3 the vocabulary of kids maybe a few blocks over, and your program's 8:30 to 2:30, you will not catch up. In fact, you might even have regression in the summer. We need specialized forms of education that's happening in 42 other states in the country. It's prohibited in Kentucky. But we need that specialized form of education that we can get through public charter schools. We need that especially for kids that start life with the fewest breaks, a holistic form that'll allow them to be successful in life.
Commissioner Comer?
Well, the best way to end poverty in Kentucky isn't through a government program. It's through having a good paying job for that person in poverty to be able to attain. And until we change the business climate in Kentucky, the things that the chambers fought for many years in Frankfurt and won many battles, but unfortunately lost many other battles. We have to change the business climate in Kentucky to be able to attract good paying jobs in the state. And we're going to have to, again, as has been mentioned, reform the tax code to make Kentucky more business friendly, but we're also going to have to become a right to work state. And that sends a signal on day one. With the next administration, the governor signed legislation that says Kentucky's a right to work state, pass it through the legislature. We're open for business, we're serious, we've got your backs, and we're going to try to do our best to attract jobs from Ohio and jobs from Indiana and jobs from Tennessee. We're going to go on the offensive. We've been playing defense in Kentucky for about 15 years now. We need to reverse that role. That's the best way to end poverty. With respect to education, as I've traveled the state for the last 2.5 years, and I talked to business people, many of you in this room, and asked, what are the biggest issues that we have in Kentucky? What's the biggest problem we have in Kentucky? They don't say the tax climate. They say, we can't find a qualified workforce. We're graduating kids from high school and college that are not career ready. We need to have a greater emphasis on science, technology, engineering, and math. We also need to place a greater emphasis on career education, or vocational education as it used to be called. Because what's happened with the education system today, we have bureaucrats in Washington and bureaucrats in Frankfurt telling our classroom teachers what the curriculum needs to be. There needs to be more input from the business community because these bureaucrats don't know what types of skills that these job creators need in their business. So we need to have more communication within the business community. It needs to be regional, kind of like with the chamber plan for economic development, have regional economic development. We need regional education where business leaders in Northern Kentucky say this is the type of curriculum and these are the type of skills that we need in our workforce. And we need to trace and track how successful those schools are once they graduate a student either with a degree or a certificate, with how successful they are in attaining a good paying job.
All right, Mr. Edlin.
This just isn't academic to me. I mean, in a global economy, there is no such thing as a throwaway kid, because our destiny is going to be determined by how well we bring together and fully develop human capital. And it's not an academic matter to me because I was born in rural Kentucky to a mother who was 2 months shy of her 17th birthday. And respectfully, absolutely, government has a role. You know, it was government that made sure that my mother was able to complete her GED. And the fact that I'm up here today, rather than being a statistics, is because I benefited from my mother's upward mobility. She was able to get an education that was insured by the government, had access to health care that the taxpayers paid for. So absolutely, in a state like Kentucky, now listen to me, folks, we have infant mortality rates in Kentucky that are twice that of Spain. We're, in terms of infant mortality, in the company of Serbia, Slovenia, and Bosnia. How many of you want to bring a company to Serbia, Slovenia, or Bosnia? Because what it demonstrates about a civil society is how well you take care of people that you're investing in for the future, particularly when they represent the whole ball game. So of course government has a role in making sure that young people have health, that they have early childhood opportunities. You know, it's interesting that we haven't talked about early childhood development yet. The Abecedarian study says that for every $17 that the public invests in early childhood development, every dollar, that we get $17 on a rate of return, because you have young people who are ready to learn. And I don't think it requires anything other than common sense to know that a kid who is hungry or is sick isn't ready to learn. So making sure that we have done everything we can do, whether it be through the faith community or government or the business community, which has been the greatest champion for early childhood development we've had in Kentucky, that's what we've got to do. We've got to build people, we've got to bring people together to build real consensus on this. And when we get them in school, Hal's exactly right. One size fits all doesn't work. It's why we need the Common Core in Kentucky, which is being championed by the business community, because you've got to make sure that all kids are able to develop at their own level, but we have a set expectation for what they need to learn to be able to compete in a global economy. So the first part of making sure that kids get a fighting chance in Kentucky is to work on the first bookend, which is early childhood development. The second is to work on the other bookend, which is the way we introduce young people into the workforce here. I've got good friends here who are from Toyota. If you haven't had a chance to go tour the advanced manufacturing facility that Toyota is leading, you're really missing out. Because what they do is they take young people out of their senior year of high school, they train them with responsibilities that are significant to the private sector, and when they get out of school a year and a half later, they're making $55,000 a year. Now here's the problem with that model. They're doing it because the government's efforts aren't effective. And this is what drives me absolutely crazy. So they have these spots for kids who are in high school, right, to be in this program. The school systems say that they can't afford the money to transport the kids from the high school to this facility. Now listen, we could have arguments about the size and scope of government, and everybody can give you their buzzwords, but the truth of the matter is government ought to be a vehicle for opportunity. We don't owe people an outcome, but we owe them a shot. And when people say, Adam, why are you in the public school system? Why are you trying to drive efficiency? Why are you fighting so hard to get resources out of the bureaucracy and into the classroom? It's because we've got to have those dollars to make sure every kid has a fighting shot. And the fact that we don't have school systems that say that they can afford transporting kids to an opportunity that will give them a huge opportunity to earn a middle-class pension, develop skill sets that they can compete in a global economy, is an indictment on the system. And to think it's organically going to get better isn't realistic. We have to have leaders in place who have the creative ability, who understand business, who understand that our job as elected officials is to solve problems. Ideology doesn't solve problems. Brains solve problems. And that's a lesson I learned in the business community, and it's one we need more of in government.
All right, Al Cross.
Commissioner and Mr. Heiner, Mr. Edlin has endorsed the Common Core state standards, which Kentucky was the first state to embrace. There's been an increasing amount of controversy about them in the last year and a half, largely raised by people on the right side of your party. How do each of you feel about the Common Core state standards? Either one of you can answer first. Nobody wants to answer first, do
Happy to
you?
do it. Yeah. What I've said on Common Core is that we need to put it on the shelf as a minimum standard in Kentucky, but that we need our own Kentucky standards, our own Kentucky curriculum, and our own Kentucky testing. We're already seeing the federal government paying for the testing and starting to get involved in Common Core. And I don't think we should sign up for something that ultimately down the road could be a federalization of Kentucky education. We need
But
our own
don't,
Kentucky
just, I've got to
education.
stop you. Don't we
But-
already have our own testing and standards? I mean, we've already had one test under these standards that was developed by Kentucky people. What do you want to change about that?
Yeah, I'm saying we should have our own Kentucky standards that do not automatically change when Common Core standards change. We should have our own Kentucky standards. We need to be cognizant of Common Core standards. We need to have standards at least as high as Common Core standards, but we need our own Kentucky standards that we don't automatically sign up for a system that ultimately the federal government may get more involved in the future.
Mr. Commissioner?
When we talk about Common Core, we need to have some common sense. And what we have in education in Kentucky is a situation where bureaucrats are mandating the curriculum requirements for teachers. We're graduating students that aren't career ready for the workforce. There needs to be more communication. I think instead of following other states, we should lead. Let's be first in the nation on some things. That's why we're proud of some of the innovative things we've done at the Department of Agriculture. We were first in the nation on a lot of new initiatives. Let's be first in the nation on education reform. Let's set our own standards in Kentucky. We know what we need here in Kentucky. We know that we need to do a better job preparing our children for the workforce. We need to place a greater emphasis on science, technology, engineering, and math. And I think that with new leadership in Frankfort, we can get together in a bipartisan way and consensus-building way with the business community and come up with our own standards that would make Kentucky the role model for the nation in education reform.
Just a quick follow-up on this. The concept behind the Common Core standards is that all the states have standards by which students in one state can be judged against students in another state. If you start setting your own standards, doesn't that get away from that and make us more difficult to compare with other states? You're even talking about vocational education being changed on a regional basis. What's wrong with national general standards? They're not all that specific. And I want both of you to answer that question.
As you travel the state and you talk to the business community and you talk to the people on the front line, the classroom teachers, there's a lot of concern with Common Core. And the concern is, just like with our food service directors, which we work with in the Department of Agriculture, the classroom lunches are being mandated by the Obama administration. There's no communication back to the food service directors to where they can say, Mr. President, they're throwing out half the food that our tax dollars are paying to put these new experimental foods on the menu. We need to have some common sense in education. We need to have a leader in Kentucky, a strong leader with bold ideas that has the confidence of our education community and our business community to set standards which the business community needs when they look for a workforce. If we have the most qualified workforce in America, we will attract the best paying jobs and best paying industries into this state.
Mr. Heiner?
Yeah.
What's the matter with national standards?
Yeah, on national standards, I think we need to be cognizant of those standards. I think our standards need to be that high and higher. I think we should lead from an education standpoint. I don't think we should just automatically sign up. The federal government If you look at all of the areas from healthcare to so many other areas that they've attempted to standardize in this country, they don't have a great track record.
These
So
weren't federal
entering
standards, though.
intent-
These were standards set by the states.
Yeah, except that the federal government is now coming in and getting involved with these standards.
They may be
yeah,
incentivizing
and
states to
raise-
adopt them, may not be. We don't know that for a fact.
indirectly and race to the top in other areas. But we need our own Kentucky standards. They need to be very high, very rigorous standards, but they need to be Kentucky standards.
How would Mr. Edlin answer the question?
I'm for the Common Core, and I don't believe in a Kentucky that's afraid of being compared to its peers around the country. We have, how many of you run businesses that were ISO certified? It's common in the business community. We ought to raise the level of expectation. And the notion, with respect, that somehow affiliating with a national set of standards takes away our ability to evaluate our students at a higher level is just, I don't think it's the case. The Common Core standard was born from frustration in the business community that we didn't have a national way to evaluate what the base level of knowledge of young people coming out of our school systems are. And all of us who have managed a business or a payroll know that the worst thing that you can have in doing that is uncertainty. So this is a standard that guarantees that we have what is a high-level performance. And Hal, I'm with you. If we want to demand more, I think we should. But that doesn't mean we can't affiliate with a national standard that gives us a really strong benchmark about not only where we stand, but gives some insurance to the business community that you're getting what you pay for in terms of an expensive system of public education that produces somebody who is ready to compete in the global economy. You can't do that without making comparisons.
All right, let's move on to another question. Sam?
Yeah, let's mix it up a little bit. Question for Adam. We've heard a lot of endorsements, obviously, with this crowd of right to work. I'd like to hear from you why that is or is not a good idea for Kentucky. And then I'd like to ask Mr. Heiner, Mr. Comer, if you could tell me a little bit, as you know, the Affordable Care Act right now is paying 100% reimbursement for Medicaid, our Medicaid expansion. That's not going to be the case when the next governor's in office. It's going to go down to 90%. Let me ask, how would you pay for it? Or let me ask more generally, what would Connect look like under your administration?
All right, let's start first with right to work.
Sure, I oppose the right to work law. My problem with it is I think it's yesterday's argument. And when we talk about ideological approaches, I think this is a one-size-fits-all approach. And what it doesn't do is allow the things that we need to really do, I think, to drive economic growth in Kentucky. And I have a specific example, if you don't mind. We need to do a better job of integrating workforce development in our overall economic development strategy. You know, we have a lot to be proud of in economic development in Kentucky. In a long measure, we invented incentives. And the net result was that we got Toyota 25, 30 years ago, which is a non-union shop, I would point out. And we're the number 3 automotive manufacturer in the United States. And going up, I think we'll catch Ohio soon. But what we really need to do is kind of complement that incentive strategy with a workforce development system that is nimble enough so when the next governor is sitting in front of a recruit, they can say, well, not only do we have the same incentives that everybody else has, but we're the one state in the country that has the ability to train your employees at no net cost to you. Folks, if you build the people, the economy will come. The lesson from anybody who studied economics is that opportunity used to follow capital. It's why the Northeast, it's why the West Coast were emerged as such centers of business. What we now know is that opportunity follows the prepared. That's why we've got to redouble our efforts in workforce development. It's why the president of the community and technical college system ought to be not only on the board of the State Department of Economic Development, but ought to be going to recruitment meetings, because this isn't just about the one-size-fits-all stuff. I worked for the Chamber of Commerce in Lexington. I have helped recruit businesses. And I can tell you what people are primarily concerned about is the quality of life in the community, the solidity of the education system in that community, a competitive tax system, and the availability of workforce. And that's where we've got to focus. Anybody who tells you that if we can just go right to work, or anybody who tells you that we can just do this one thing and it will create this panacea, they're not telling you the truth.
All right, Mr. Heiner and Commissioner Comer, just a real quick word before we move the ACA and the Medicaid expansion on right to work. We hear that from the business community. We hear it from neighboring states. We're not successful here in Kentucky. Why? And is it the answer to our economic woes, Mr. Heiner?
It's in the top two issues. If we want to be competitive for the best jobs, it's what I've done for the last 30 years of my life. And I can tell you, talk to company after company after company. We've got a Central Kentucky company right now. Happens to be a Japanese company. They owned the site. They bought another European company. They had the site right next door to put it in another manufacturing facility. It was coming to Kentucky. And at the last minute, their board decides, we're not taking it to Kentucky. They're just getting ready to open, actually, in a bordering state. And the reason was right to work. So when their executives look at you in the face and say, why wouldn't we go where we have the best long-term advantage? They're thinking out 20 years. And you can't answer the question, which is where we are today as one of, with 24 states, even including Michigan, that's right to work. You know we're in trouble. To go down to Bowling Green, talk to their judge executive about, they were within 2 days of the final decision. What's the final decision? It was on right to work. It didn't come to Bowling Green. They'd be opening up today with 320 manufacturing jobs. Go to Shelby County. Talk to a facility there with 4 manufacturing facilities. They're foreign owned. They've been there for a long time. They were going to bring in a 5th facility. They already had management in place. It was a big enough issue, along with other regulatory items in Kentucky, that they're not in Kentucky. They actually went to a new state rather than build on their success in Kentucky.
Commissioner
so
Comer?
it is an absolutely important item for us in the future.
If it is so popular, if it's something that the surrounding states have, why don't we have it in Kentucky?
We've just never had a governor to push right to work. And that's a huge issue. As I talk to leaders in the chamber and employers across the state, they said that is one piece of the puzzle that we need to have, and it is a top tier issue. It sends a signal that Kentucky is open and ready for business. We're serious about protecting and helping our business climate get better. We also need to focus on comprehensive tax reform. We need to pass tort reform in this state. We need to focus on workforce development in this state. All the things that the Chamber's been lobbying about, all the things that the Chamber of Commerce puts in the legislative bulletins that you've worked so hard lobbying the General Assembly for so many years. Right to work is the first thing that we can do in a new administration within the first 5 days. It does not cost 1 penny taxpayer dollars to pass. Again, it sends a signal. When we focus on education reform and all the things that the business community seeks, this state's going to be different overnight. We can change Kentucky with one legislative session in this state, but it's going to take a leader that has the confidence of the business community, that has the confidence of the General Assembly, that can lead this state with bold ideas. And right to work is a major issue. And with respect to what Adam said about tax incentives, if we had a better business climate in this state, if our tax code was more competitive with Tennessee's, Florida's, and Texas, we wouldn't have to rely so heavily on tax incentives. We are too dependent on tax incentives. We're too dependent on the government in this state, and it's going to have to change with new leadership in the executive branch.
The Affordable Care Act and the expansion of Medicaid and what will happen in just a couple of years in your either administrations or your leadership in Kentucky, what would you do to deal with that?
That's going to be a huge problem. When the federal subsidy ends, that's going to add $500 million, or going to subtract $500 million from the general fund budget in the state of Kentucky. General fund budget for the state is $10 billion, roughly. So $500 million is an additional 5%. You saw the chart of where the growth in spending is taking place in the state. We're not growing at the same rate of our surrounding states. So that's going to be a huge issue. And as I've said before, we need spending reform in this state. We need to privatize every service that we can possibly privatize in state government. Because you all know the private sector can do it cheaper than the government 99% of the time. And we've done it in our office, and I think it could be spread throughout state government, privatizing every service that state government can possibly privatize and reducing the state workforce. When you break the state budget down, line by line, it doesn't matter which division of which cabinet it is, the biggest expense in each division of every cabinet in state government is personnel. We have too many state employees. No governor has wanted to say that before because the state employees turn out in statewide elections. And I love the state employees. We have some of the best state employees in state government in the Department of Agriculture. But we can operate with less state employees throughout all of state government. So if you're talking about significantly reducing state government spending, you have to look at personnel, you have to look at privatization of as many services as we can provide, and we have to focus on creating jobs and growing the economy. As you all know, the tax code's not elastic in this state. It's not growing with the economy. We can do better in this state, but it's going to have to start with new leadership.
Mr. Hunter, you're,
Could I just follow up for 1 second? Will Connect continue in its current form if you're governor?
If the federal government does not repeal Obamacare, then it is the law of the land, and it will have to continue in the next administration. All forms. We can point the blames. Republicans are good at pointing out all the problems, but they never have solutions to the problems. We're going to have to
I agree.
We're going to have to face the... I'm not even going there. I fight enough battles as it is. But we're going to have to not point the finger. You know, I never would have supported Obamacare if I'd been in Congress. But if it's not repealed in the next year, we're going to have to pay for it. And it's a situation where in Kentucky's the only state in the United States where there are more people on Medicaid than there are kids in the public school system. We have over 1 million people on Medicaid in the state. The population of Kentucky is only 4.3 million. We almost have 1 out of 4 people in this state on Medicaid. We're going to have to change the criteria in the future to make it more difficult to get on Medicaid. We're going to have to shrink. If we can't shrink the number, we're going to have to stop the massive growth of people on Medicaid because it's not sustainable.
all right, Mr. Hunter?
Yeah. You know, I was disappointed in the way Kentucky went about joining Connect in the Medicaid expansion. And the reason for that is you see around the country where they're getting waivers to build in incentives for healthier lifestyles. And we didn't do that. Here in Kentucky, we just signed up for it. No idea how we're going to pay the $300 to $500 million when it starts coming due in 2017. So we signed up for the patient care part, but we didn't sign up for the health care part, for the incentives part, for people to choose healthier options in life. And those are the kind of things we need to look at if we're going to reduce the overall cost of the system.
All right, Al, a follow-up?
Do you guys dismiss what the governor has said about the enrollment of people in Medicaid creating enough jobs in health care that it will essentially pay for itself? Are those figures specious or not?
I do not agree with that.
And why not?
I just have little confidence in big government ever fulfilling its...
Well, this is a PricewaterhouseCoopers study.
Right, right. If you talk to hospital administrators across the state, they're very, very dissatisfied. We're going to have to cut the reimbursement rates for the medical providers. We're going to get to a point in the state, my father was a dentist, we're going to get to the point in the state where medical providers are not going to serve Medicaid patients. We're going to have to change the criteria for Medicaid. Our criteria is too liberal in the state to get on Medicaid, as evidenced by 1 out of 4 Kentuckians on Medicaid right now.
Let's get an answer from the other two guys. What about these studies?
I happen to think that over the long term, it is far more affordable to have people insured than not, Al. And Jamie is absolutely right that 1 in 4 Kentuckians on Medicaid is not sustainable. But it is a function of the fact that we are among the sickest states in the country. So this is the system we've got. It is the law of the land. And I am actively right now, Al, as you wrote about just last week, I'm conducting hearings all over the state to talk to rural hospitals who are deathly concerned about their ability to survive given the complexity of what has happened in the healthcare space. Think of what's happened in Kentucky in the last few years. We've had the introduction, a disastrous introduction of Medicaid managed care. We can all be for managed care, but I think most agree that the introduction was a total disaster. We have had the passage of the Affordable Care Act. We have had an economy in free fall, particularly in the eastern part, where as a result, the impact of that on health care is that private provided insurance goes down because employers can't afford to have it for their employees because they're laying off employees. So what has conspired is that we've got an environment, particularly in rural Kentucky, folks, where we have 66 rural hospitals. And right now I'm in the business, just like Tim Geithner did with the banks during the Great Recession. I am stress testing the financial health of every one of those rural hospitals in Kentucky because policymakers need to have a real sense of what the bottom line impact is at that level. And I don't want to live in a Kentucky where people in rural Kentucky have to drive an hour to have a baby, or folks like my father, my grandfather, all who lost fingers in farm accidents have to bleed out in the field rather than having access to care. So again, it's not just about the, whether you're for Obamacare or for the Affordable Care Act. These have very practical impacts at the grassroots level, and you better have elected officials who understand what it's going to take to fix the system, because it's not going away. But let's make no mistake, we have so many people enrolled in Connect because we have so many sick, poor people.
All right, Mr. Heiner.
Yeah. What I'm hearing as I talk to hospitals, particularly rural hospitals, is they're seeing a shift from private insurance to Medicaid.
Sure.
So from full reimbursement to about a 70% reimbursement. So where they're headed, if you look at their financials, it's sort of a slow motion train wreck. It's not going to happen today or 6 months or a year from today, but they're headed in the wrong direction. They're headed to the red.
And they're not going to make it up on volume, you don't think?
Yeah, in fact, they've said, actually, the more we do, the more we lose.
I understand.
And so where we're headed is a situation that we have restricted access to health care. So that's not the way I think we want to reduce the amount of expenditures for health care, that people have to drive 90 miles to get health care.
What about the studies, though, that say that this will eventually pay for itself with more jobs in health care?
Al,
I'm asking Hal. He hasn't answered that yet.
Yeah. It's not proving to be true. In fact, what
At
we're
least
seeing
yet.
is reduced jobs in health care.
Okay.
Al, I think it may actually prove to be true in the end. I think where we're going to get in the longer term is a healthier Kentucky that you're able to less expensively service the population. But the problem is that I'm afraid we're going to lose for building for the future, we could lose the present.
Right.
I'm an optimist, Al. I do not believe it will be proven true. I hope it is, but I do not believe it will be. It's very noble.
You sound like a pessimist.
It's very noble that every Kentuckian has health care. That should be a goal of all of ours. But somebody's got to pay for it.
That's right.
And that somebody is you all. And we cannot continue to sustain this many people, this big of a percentage of our population on Medicaid.
All right, Sam.
How about a little horse race stuff? This is sort of my bread and butter. I think everybody's had enough policy for one day. I'd like to talk about chief criticism of both of y'all. And then, Adam, I'd like you to talk a little bit about, you decided not to run. How much of an appetite is there for somebody other than Jack Conway to get in the race? Commissioner Comer, what we're hearing a lot from Mr. Heiner is that Frankfort insiders aren't getting the job done. Why are you not a Frankfort insider? Why doesn't that apply to you? And Mr. Heiner, you recently you've put a total now of $4.2 million of your own money in. A lot of your critics are saying you can't buy an election. Gentlemen, could you respond to each of those?
Thank you for those.
You can go first.
Yeah, and the corollary to that last question to Hal is, why you got to raise $4.2 million? Don't you have enough people believing in you to contribute on their own?
I was nicer than that.
Yeah, I'm happy to lead off with that. I've spent my life building a business, not a political organization. And I'm thankful that we've had success. But I also have 4 children, and I have 5 grandchildren, and here within about 45 days, hopefully be 6 grandchildren. And I'm worried about where we're headed in Kentucky. I see a Commonwealth just with immense possibilities. I mean, the perfect location in the country, so many things going for us, great people, a great heritage. And we have way underperformed that potential. So I can't think of any better place to invest that success than the future of Kentucky. So for the last 4.5 months, I've been nonstop, 13 hours a day, going county to county to county to county. Yeah, that's true. I don't have a political organization. I haven't spent years and years in Frankfort. But I've been building a business, and I've worked with hundreds of businesses. I know what they need to come to Kentucky and stay in Kentucky. So quite frankly, I can't think of a better place to invest that success than Kentucky's future.
Commissioner Comer, the accusation of being a career politician?
I'm 41 years old, be 42 next month. I served 11 years in the Kentucky General Assembly. That's a part-time position. I live in Tompkinsville, Kentucky. That's 3 hours from Frankfort, one way. Al knows where it is. I'm not a career politician. And that's a buzzword. If Hal had won his last race, we'd been in public service the same amount of time. So, it's not about how long you've served. It's about what you've done when you've served. And I think that one reason that people are encouraging me to run for governor is because they think, here's a guy that does what he thinks best. He may not be the most polished candidate, but he's somebody that I can trust. He's somebody that has stood up to the federal government. When we talk about the coal industry and the EPA regulations, we had a situation where the federal government tried to pick on farmers. And I sued the federal government and won. And that shows you can stand up to the federal government. With respect to classroom teachers in the state, I understand that teachers get blamed for a lot of the problems in the state, when the reality is it's the bureaucrats and the decision makers in Washington and Frankfurt that mandate what the classroom teachers have to do, and then the funding gets sucked up in the central offices and doesn't make it to the classroom teachers. I understand why people that are barely making a living wage want to see the minimum wage increased in the state. It's because they don't make enough money to pay their bills. What we need to do are things like the Earned Income Tax Credit in this state. We need to focus on how do we help people make a better living? How do we help this next generation have a better way of life than we had? So I'm proud of the public service. I've been Commissioner of Agriculture for 2.5 years, and I'm proud of the job that we've done. I think that's a role model for state government. If you want to see what we can do with state government as a whole, look at what we've done with the Department of Agriculture. I'm proud of my service, and I don't think 2.5 years in the executive branch qualifies for me to be a career politician. And in saying that, I would hope that the decision that we will announce on August, if that is yes.
At Fancy Farm?
At Fancy Farm, moving
Live
forward,
on KET?
Live on KET.
He's building an audience.
Just don't leave after McConnell and Grimes stick around. I think Jack will show up at that, but I don't know. But what we're going to do, what I hope my goal for 2015, if the decision is to run, that we have a clean race, that we talk about the issues, that we talk about ways we can move Kentucky forward, that I talk about my vision of Kentucky growing up in a small rural community that was devastated after NAFTA, a community of people that are proud, that want to live in Kentucky. We have that problem all across the state. So many people in this room are from small communities where your best and brightest, when they graduate from high school, they go to college and they never come back.
Mr. Heiner, is that an agreement that you're willing to make to us today, that you're looking for a vigorous race to discuss the issues and to make it as a good and clean race as you can?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a policy-oriented person, and I did serve in local government for a while. Anybody that knows me and my involvement, it's been focused on policy.
You know, when Sam leaned over a few minutes ago and whispered that he wanted to ask a horse race contest question, I thought he was going to talk about expanded gambling.
Yeah.
I had no idea. And it's been so long since he asked Adam Edelin the question, I've forgotten what it was.
Well, let me just say this. Just answer the one you want. Just answer whatever question you want to. These are two very good men, and Jamie's been a great Commissioner of Agriculture, and Hal is a heck of a businessman, and he deserves to spend his money any way he sees fit. Well, Adam, let me ask you this. How much of an appetite is there for somebody other than Jack? And you're a Democrat. These guys are Republicans. Why shouldn't either one of them be the next governor?
Well, that's a great question. Let's start with the Jack question. Jack is in a very strong position in the Democratic primary, but I think there will be a primary, and I think Jack probably hopes that there's a primary. And primaries make good candidates better, and I think that's been the history on our side, and I think that's something that speaks well of whomever our candidate is in the fall, and I look forward to supporting them. I have worked closely with Jamie Comer to clean up the Department of Agriculture. I mean, this guy inherited a mess. And we worked together in a bipartisan fashion and gave the people of Kentucky an agency that is demonstrably better. I have an immense amount of respect for what Hal has accomplished in the private sector. And as an education reformer who disagrees on some of the processes with you, Hal Heiner's commitment to education reform is genuine. There's no question. And both of these men are admirable public servants. But I'm going to be going a different direction in the governor's race because I think their economic development strategy is one, fellas, that reflects Mississippi. And I think what we need in Kentucky is a dynamic, more modern economic development strategy that is going to have the commitment of people who are practical and understand that we have got to completely integrate economic development and workforce development, that aren't going to make retreats on our commitment to some of the standards that have created the middle class in this state. I I mean, I think what we've got to aspire to collectively is something more than a low-wage, low-skill economy. And to do that, I just think you've got to understand we're going to have to raise the level of expectation for what we have from young people when they get out of the system. It means you're going to have the courage to look the Tea Party in the eye and say, I'm sorry, but Common Core is where we have to go. That's the kind of leadership we've got to have. And these two folks are admirable. They're good men. I've enjoyed working with them to the extent we've been able to. But there are some philosophical and fundamental issues about the future of Kentucky that we disagree.
Now the expanded gambling question. Casinos all across the country are closing. They're shutting down in Maine and New York and a number of other states. Ohio fell short of its projected revenue. There are announced closings. 12 casinos nationwide have closed. Given that 15 of 22 casino states showed any gain at all in gambling revenue from 2011 to 2013, why would any future leader of Kentucky or politician advocate for expanded gambling in Kentucky, Mr. Heiner?
Actually, it is not on my platform in running it.
Are you a supporter?
We have a current governor that has spent 6-7 years as number one issue is to expand casinos here in Kentucky. We've allowed states all around us to build these new platforms that are attractive to jobs. They're growing their economies 10, 12, 15%, and we're stuck here at 6% over the last several years.
So you're opposed to expanded gambling?
My focus, it's not on my platform. My focus is totally on how do we get onto the top 10 list in those first 2 years.
So,
on that issue, the legislature has spent 20 years talking about that. And I've said if the legislature decides to pass a constitutional amendment and send it to the people for ratification, I'm not going to stand in the way of it. But it is not a focus of mine. My focus is how do we compete for the jobs that we're making the Final Four list, but we're not getting selected.
If the House and Senate pass a law by statute to approve expanded gambling, not a constitutional amendment, it would come to your desk. Would you veto it?
Well, we've had attorney generals on both sides of that issue. Some say we need to have a constitutional amendment. Some have said we don't have to have a constitutional amendment. If that was to pass, I think it would be an instant lawsuit that would just go on for years and years and years. But I think the only route is constitutional amendment, and then the people would vote on ratification if the legislature thinks that's important for Kentucky going forward.
Commissioner Comer, why would any future leader or future governor look at expanded gambling as a revenue source, given the facts of the last decade where so many casinos have closed and revenues have fallen far short of projections?
Well, obviously, the next governor and the next administration is going to have to look at every avenue to grow revenue in the state without increasing taxes. That's not something that I'm going to push, but I will answer the question very clearly. I support letting the people decide. That's been my position since I was running for Commissioner of Agriculture. 70% of the state wants to vote on the issue. It's something the Chamber's pushed. I think it should be something that the people should get to do. They want to decide that issue. Obviously, there are lots of issues about how the language would be worded, and that's where you're going to have a strong governor. One reason Governor Beshear, who's a nice guy and has good poll numbers, one reason that he's never passed that is he's never gotten all the tracts in the room and all the competing interest in the room and said, how are we going to work this out? A strong, effective governor that's sincere about passing any issue can do that. Just like tax reform, you can't file a bill on the 32nd day of the 60-day session on comprehensive tax reform and expect it to pass.
If gambling was passed by statute and it came to your desk, would you sign it or would you veto it?
It would depend on the language in the bill. But I'm not going to sit up here and stand in the way of the will of the General Assembly and the will of the people.
Mr. Edelin, is expanded gambling, is that a concern of yours? Is that a revenue source that we need, or is it one that we should put on the back burner and look at other revenue sources?
It's one we have to have. And the fact that we've spent 15 years fighting about this is beneath the dignity of any government that proclaims to be effective. It needs to happen. It needs to happen immediately. It needs to happen by whatever means we can do it, whether it's legislative action, whether it's a constitutional amendment. But we cannot allow this issue to continually dominate the bandwidth of public discourse in Kentucky. The never-ending, you ever seen the movie Groundhog Day? Welcome to the conversation about expanded gaming in Kentucky. And it's consuming resources that we need to be talking about other things. So it is high time that the legislative leadership get together and decide whether we're going to have an up and down vote on this, and a little tough love for the interests that are affiliated with. Jamie's right. They have got to get their act together. I mean, the lack of common position on what language should look like with the expanded gaming proposals every session since Ruby Laffoon was governor is deeply frustrating. And it's just past time that we get on with this. And I think we ought to take one big shot at it, up or down. And if it doesn't work, let's get on with it.
Okay, Al Cross, we're going into our lightning round now. If you could, just so we can get as many questions and responses in, and reporter questions also will be concise to get as much information. As Mr. Heiner pointed out, we've been here for a day and a half. I know that people, but this is so darn good, we're just going to keep on going. So
right.
If you want to get up and leave, fine. No, I'm just kidding. Al?
Okay. One of Kentucky's greatest problems is its health status, and the single most contributory element to that is the fact that more Kentuckians smoke than in any other state, 29%. They suffer also because of secondhand smoke. Why should the state not pass a statewide smoking ban? And I'll ask the Agriculture Commissioner first.
All right, good question. I don't smoke, never have, never will. I don't like to be in a restaurant where there's cigarette smoke. But I don't like the federal government continuing to pass mandates on private business. And the fundamental problem I have with the statewide smoking ban is this is another part of the federal government saying to private business owners, you cannot do this, you can do this, regulations, the new...
What's it got to do with the federal government? I'm talking about a state
it's just
action.
the state government's trying to follow suit on a lot of things. And just like Governor Beshear has been a big cheerleader for Barack Obama. And I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that.
All right.
But I will say this, Al. I would support a statewide smoking ban in government agencies. I will support a statewide smoking ban in government agencies, but not another mandate on private sector business. If the business wants to ban smoking and they pay taxes, that's their right. That's their private property. If it's the government saying it, I don't think that's right.
Yeah. I believe in limited central government and local decision making. I think this decision should be made at the local level.
I believe in common sense, and 90% of the members of the State Chamber of Commerce believe that we ought to have a statewide smoking ban. You're absolutely right. Let's pass the statewide smoking ban. Let's be a progressive state that protects health, and let's do the right thing. This is an example of what happens when we are ideological and not practical.
90% believe in right to work, too, I would say. I had to get you that.
Yeah, no, that's very good.
Touché.
Which means you're right, every once in a while.
All right, next question from Sam Youngman.
I'm trying to think of a good one here.
Well, what about comprehensive tax reform? You've all talked about it. It's been talked about here. Everybody's a champion of it until it gets right down to it. We do it incrementally. Governor Fletcher attempted it. He was ridiculed because it was called tax reform light. If you're such advocates for it, how do you get it done, Mr. Heiner?
Yeah. What's happening around the country is they have governors that are out in the state, organizations like Kentucky Chamber and businesses informing the people of why we need it. And really, if you want big improvements, it has to be the citizens of Kentucky calling the representatives and senators. It's not going to happen just in Frankfort. But we are desperate for comprehensive tax reform. We cannot stay here at 6%. And we have to make that case to Kentuckians on why it needs to change.
Would you lower which rates? Would you choose what Indiana has done? Would you go with a no income tax at all, as Tennessee has done?
Yeah, as time goes on, we'll be rolling out a full tax policy, proposed tax policy. But yes, we need a dramatic reduction of personal income tax with a target towards zero.
Right.
You look at the 9 states that have the lowest tax rates, and we're actually, Kentucky is in the 9 states with the highest tax rates. And there's just absolutely no comparison to the economic growth between those two.
Adam Edelin, it is an enormous project with so many moving parts. How do you get it done and get it done in the right way to move Kentucky forward?
Relationships. It's going to take the next governor. Remember, we're ushering out of a period in which we were literally trying to hold the ship of state together. In Kentucky, I think we came out of the Great Recession in a better shape than a lot of other places. But now the sun's beginning to come out, and we've got to have an agenda to move the state forward. I think everybody agrees comprehensive tax reform is part of that. The reality, Bill, of the inadequacy of our tax network, both the degree it retards business growth and the degree to which it underperforms for the state treasury, is going to become abundantly and painfully clear under the next administration. So I think what it's going to take is a governor who has a specific plan, who goes out and sells it, and who works at a very early stage to line up support from the legislature. And there is going to have to be a whole lot of give and take. I mean, this is going to be something that to completely get done is going to, in my view, have to be run out of the basement room of the governor's mansion. I mean, this is going to be lots of conversation. You cannot drop this in late December, right before a legislative session. This is something that a governor, to get done, is going to have to spend a year preparing the public.
How could you have, Mr. Comer, a more progressive, enthusiastic cheerleader than Lieutenant Governor Jerry Abramson, who couldn't get it done?
Well, Abramson's goal was to create more revenue, in my opinion. It wasn't to make Kentucky's business climate more competitive, and there's a big difference. We need to pass comprehensive tax reform that makes Kentucky the most competitive state in the United States to own a business. Now, by doing that, if you look at the states that aren't growing, they tax productivity like we do. We tax productivity. We have a higher income tax and corporate taxes. States that are growing and doing well, like Texas and Tennessee, they tax consumption. So we need to focus more on consumption than productivity. Our tax code in Kentucky was written in the 50s when we were a huge manufacturing state. Our whole business climate has changed in the state, and the types of industries that we have that employ people and the types of wages that people pay are totally different now. So we have to eliminate the income tax in the state or significantly reduce it. The problem with that is that income tax makes up 32% of the total revenue for the state of Kentucky. Income tax and sales tax are about the same. So if you eliminate a third of the revenue for the state of Kentucky, you're going to have to significantly change other taxes. And Adam's right, it's going to be a very difficult piece of legislation. You can't file it on the 32nd day of the session because there will be winners and losers. There will be industries that aren't taxed that probably will be. There will be taxes that may be lowered and eliminated, inventory type taxes. There will be taxes that will be, have to be raised. So what we do in the end has to be something that makes Kentucky the most competitive state in the United States to own a business, not just the goal of create more revenue to pay for these big government programs.
All right, quick response from Adam, and we're going to wrap up here in just a minute.
The model for getting this done exists. It was the way Paul Patton passed higher ed reform in 97, 98. This was, believe me, folks, I was a young aide to him. The idea of stripping the community colleges away from the University of Kentucky was not popular. I mean, it polled somewhere below athlete's foot in the public imagination. But Patton, and Al covered this, Patton did a town hall at every single community college in Kentucky. And folks, students were camping out. It was my job on the staff to count the number of one-finger salutes that Paul Patton got. And it got in the hundreds. But the point is he took a long period of time to sell this, to specifically explain and answer every single question people had. And then when we needed muscle at the end, he brought it, and he had the relationships with the legislature to get it done. And that's going to be the model that we have to pass comprehensive tax reform in Kentucky, regardless if it's a governor of either party.
All right, Sam?
Let's go down the line. True or false? Gay marriage will be a big issue in the next governor's race.
False.
Why?
Because the politicians are way behind the public on this, and there aren't many people under the age of 40 who think that this isn't anything other than a fundamental civil rights issue.
Gentlemen?
True, because the issue isn't the issue. The issue will be if Jack Conway is the Democrat nominee, Your job as Attorney General is to uphold the Constitution of the state of Kentucky. The Constitution is very clear. The last constitutional amendment we passed to the state by a 2-to-1 margin said that people in Kentucky were opposed to gay marriage and didn't want to recognize gay marriages from other states. So I think it will be an issue.
Let me follow up real quick. Jack Conway has said, we're going to lose this case anyway. The state can't afford $100,000 for outside attorneys, or for attorneys to fight it. You're running on being a steward of taxpayer money. Did Jack Conway not make the fiscally sound decision there?
How do you know what it would cost? He's the Attorney General. He files lawsuits every day against drug companies, for-profit colleges, and the list goes on and on and on. I mean, his job's to uphold the Constitution. That's just one issue. We have a lot of issues that we disagree with from the federal government, from the liberal judges in the court system now. So his job as an Attorney General is to uphold the Constitution. Whether you agree with gay marriage or disagree with gay marriage, the Constitution's clear in Kentucky, and he's the chief law officer for the state of Kentucky, and he didn't do his job.
Let's go to Mr. Hunter.
Yeah, I'd say false. Kentuckians have made themselves very clear on this issue with the constitutional amendment. Everybody's sort of waiting over the next, I guess, year or two to see if the Supreme Court's going to end up deciding nationwide.
You don't envision that being part of the debate?
I don't see it as part of the debate.
Final question this afternoon from Al Cross.
What would this administration's response be if the Obama regulations on carbon dioxide are upheld? How can the state adapt to that? And I know that's a fairly complex question. Please try to boil it down to about a minute apiece.
Mr. Hunter.
Yeah, we have to fight back. We need to join together with other states on a states' rights platform. My understanding of how this country was founded is that the states formed the federal government didn't form the states. This is a huge competitive advantage for every Kentuckian. I mean, the fact that our energy costs are 25% less than the average in the United States because of coal gives us a real advantage for attracting manufacturing jobs to our state in the future. We absolutely have to hold on to that.
But exactly how? Are you talking about going back to court, or just how does the state adapt if it's held up in court? What do you do?
Yeah, I think we join together with other states and we fight back. That'll take legal action, whatever it takes, until we get a new administration in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
Look, the rest of the world is turning back to coal. And why is Germany turning back to coal? It gives them a competitive manufacturing advantage.
Okay,
It's the low-cost fuel. We need to hold on to that here.
Adam.
We've got to use every tool at our disposal, Al, to try to prevent that from happening. What it would mean, I think, would be the total and final destruction of the coal industry in central Appalachia. And we can get into the arguments for or against, but that is, the economy in eastern Kentucky is in deep, deep recession. People are really hurting. And it's not all federal overreach, but fellas, this is part of it. And it's the dynamic forces in the market that are negatively impacting coal. But there is no question federal overreach is requiring those who mine coal in central Appalachia to try to compete with at least one hand tied behind their back.
All right, Commissioner.
I will fight. I will try to lead an effort with other states if I were in the executive branch to do everything to protect the coal industry in the state. These regulations don't make common sense. Mike Duncan gave a great presentation earlier today about if you eliminated all the coal-fired plants in the United States, it wouldn't even make a dent on the total environment here in the United States. The one competitive advantage that we've had with manufacturing, despite our poor business climate in the state, has been low energy costs. So this will affect not just eastern Kentucky or western Kentucky, not just the people in the coal industry. This affects every Kentuckian that utilizes electricity, every business, whether you're in agriculture, or whether you're in financial services or manufacturing or whatever. We have to fight for this. This can't just be something we give lip service to and say, well, we disagree with the president on it, we'll go on. We did the same thing. We had a scenario in the Department of Agriculture where the DEA came in and confiscated seeds for a research project that we had that got a lot of press. I filed suit against the Attorney General, Eric Holder of the United States, and people laughed. Well, we won. And how do you know what would have happened if the Attorney General and the Governor had stood up to the President and filed suit and fought and kicked and screamed and tried to fight for the coal industry? That's what we need. We've got to have leadership that will get the backs of the risk takers in the state and the backs of the taxpayers in the state, and standing up for coal should be at the top of the list.
I know all of you will join me in thanking these leaders of Kentucky. I think one of the most important points to come out of here is that they're here. We need vigorous dialogue and debate and issues, and I know all of you appreciate them putting themselves up front among these tough street reporters. Sam and Al, thanks to them also.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like Dave to come up and just give you a farewell word or two, please.
I want to say thanks to these gentlemen who participated on this panel. I thought that was about as substantive as you could get in however many minutes we spent up here. They hit the issues and answered directly, and I was texting a couple of our folks saying, let's get the videotape and just do a spreadsheet of where folks stand on these various issues, because this will play out over the next year in very, very important ways. Thank you all for being here. Obviously, well, it might not be obvious, but to us at the Chamber, we feel this has really grown into a key event, a signature event for the state of Kentucky. I don't know of any other conference in which the issues of Kentucky are discussed and debated as intensely as this one. I feel very good about the speakers we had and appreciate all the ones who have given of their time to be here. You all travel safely, and let us know if we can help in any way. We will post various things from the presentations on our website, so stay tuned for that. Take care.